This week in hospitality marketing, live show number 531. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining me. Here in Florida, we're looking for a little bit of a weather change next week, which would be nice. I know that's not a great start to the week or of the conversation. If you're all around the world, which you are, as everyone comes alive on connecting. Thank you so much for everybody. South Korea, wow. And for the odd time zones that people come from to catch us live, thank you so very much for waiting in the green room, and then boom, here we are. So I want to get to a topic. First is to apologize, I'm deferring a topic right now. I've been wanting to talk about AI's use, dynamic rate development for hotels, and how it'll be different than airlines and so forth, or how much different it'll be for airlines. But that is such a moving target right now that I feel almost as we're talking about it, it will be changing. And so I keep deferring it, because as I talk to more people that I would like to bring on as co-hosts for the conversation, there's different opinions and static opinions and uncertainties. And a lot of people consensusly, other than those people that I think have made their mind up, are really hard to pin down as to what they actually are willing to share as to what they think it's going to be like, only because it is changing so quickly as to how people are using this. I want to touch on that a little bit on the end of our conversation today about the topic that I did decide to talk about today, because it's becoming an ever-present concern, a very real concern. And for that, let me first discuss what the topic is. My topic is budgets, bonuses, and fourth quarter strategies. We live through a process as hospitality people, and marketers live through this process as the facilitators of these things, that we're wrapping up our budgets this season right now. October is the last. This is the submission and authorization process associated with the budgets we've been working on since September, and since really, in all honesty, beginning of August, even late July in some ways. And we're at that end of the road to it. In the process arc of budgets being made this year has been a very fast-paced transitional perspective as to what 2026 is going to be looking like. Usually about halfway through, you get the prognosticators that last year said what they thought this year was going to be. They have now a half a year under the belt of actuals, and they revise their perspective for the remaining half of the year. That usually is why budget season is where it lands, is because we have a more realistic perspective as to how this year worked out, in contrast to how it was projected to last year when the budgets were made last year for this year. And we try to adjust accordingly for next year as to what that impact level would be. And it went from moderate growth, same as growth, flatline growth of 24 to 25 to, hey, guess what? We're, for the first time, really saying we're going to have negative growth. We're going to have a contraction from what we've had last year, not just a contraction from what we said. That got shedded months ago on their update. But now we're actually being told by the same prognosticators that we should expect a negative, a retraction of our business compared to last year for this year, with no foreseeable variance next year. I'm sure they'll come up with some sort of spark of hope mentality, but probably just a mitigated loss number. And so we're sitting here with our budgets that we literally probably were throwing away every other day to come up with what we think is the new version of what we think we should be doing. A lot of it comes to the operational expenses, capital expense, as to how much gets spent on our development for next year. That obviously got, or at least adjusted and modified. And I say that generically because there are aspects, tiers of our industry, luxury and so forth, that are not as directly affected, and in some ways have to have the mandate that they always have to keep that wheel circulating as to constant improvements, constant value of enhancements to their product to be classified as luxury. But even in that segment, we're seeing a slowdown, which is usually the financial proof version. Rich people will always travel. They may try to save money in some ways because that's why they're wealthy, but mostly they will continue their spending habits, where everybody below that line now has a tiered process of decisions as to how much they spend, if they spend at all. So even that market is getting affected by this actions that are going on. Now, this is going to be new, and I think it has, from conversations with people, new for many people. They've never lived through a natural business cycle, a negative cycle, because most of the history of people in our industry currently have only had catastrophic or impact-driven changes. COVID, lockdown. That wasn't an economic cycle. That was a social cycle that happened. Boom! All of a sudden, can't sell hotels. For those back financially, the financial break and so forth. This is the first contraction of business cycle wise, where it's not because of an event-driven action. It's because of what's going on in the world actions, and these things are happening. And so we're going through this business cycle now, this progressive declination compared to the persistency of growth that we've had historically. And a lot of people, this is new territory because it's not about pointing a finger at something. It's literally having to react to what is the process of our industry right now. So creating these budgets that we're hopefully getting approved in this process this month is a lot about what is next year looking like for us to decide how we're going to spend based on what we really think we can make his money. That's the whole budget process. How much do we think we're making his money? And how much does that work out to how we get to spend it? I'm sure there's been a lot of angst in the conversations as to things that have to be reduced, whether they can be put back in. That's usually the carrot on the stick. It's like, well, we have to take it out for the budget to fit the numbers, but know that if it doesn't go as bad as we think it is or as conservative as we think it is, this would be the prioritization of reinstituting things into the budget. We'll be able to put that back in because of this. And we're seeing a lot of things that are influencing what's being taken out right now. The regrettable part is, in spite of all of that conversation of 2026 budgets and what to do and how to do that, we're still in 2025. And we set up bonuses and rewards programs and incentive values and goals and so forth for our team members in lieu many times as to dedicated money to spend as his salary. Say, hey, look, your salary is this, but your opportunity for growth on it is this. That is usually the relationship that exists with sales teams. It has in some way become modeling for bonusing for revenue managers, that they have a way of incrementally increasing their income. There's performance bonuses associated with team members, executive teams, and so forth, and operational standards and so forth. So there's all these things that are there. But what makes all of those things that are there work is greasing the wheels with the revenue stream, top line revenue that provides that whole functionality to exist. And we've seen this year that it hasn't been hitting what we expected it to be hitting this year. If we took what was expected last year when it was forecasted we'd have growth, 2-4%, so forth and so on, and that didn't happen, and it has continued to go in the opposite direction. All of these goals that are connected to the ability to be rewarded for the hard work have also been put into jeopardy. Now, the hard work hasn't gone away. The hard work is still there. It's just the reward for it is not there. At first, missing bonuses in the early part of this year was, as with any year, we go through this life cycle. Well, we still have the rest of the year to make it up. But we've shortfalled in January, February, or March. Well, we just push that forward to say, well, we have to be that much better in April, May, June, July, on and on and on. But now that we're in October, the ability to adjust for the negative is, in most cases, economically unavailable. I mean, you would have to have a complete reversal of opportunity for your property potentially to make back up all those shortfalls that the bonus program that you're working under is covering. You're pretty much knowing that even if you hit your current numbers as projected, that doesn't compensate for the numbers you didn't hit up to this point. It's the reality of bonuses. It's the reality of the award systems and so forth. Ownerships and management companies always put the carrot as far out as they can, and users and facilitators of those of the operations would always try to pull it closer so they have a more reasonable way of hitting that bonus. That's a big reality, and it has an impact on the performance metrics of your team, because for a lot of teams, they just realize it's not going to happen. So, to coin a phrase, why knock myself out on something that isn't going to benefit? One of it is more character, that they will do their best all the time and continue to think in the aspirational hope that they can still make that difference in bonus. And a lot of people just will never be relented into not trying hard. We're not saying team members of that, but for the most part, there is an apathetic way of looking. It's like, I'm doing the best I can. It's not going to reward me the way I would hope to have done, but the year will end up short. The concern now more is how short in relationship of security of job. security of their career growth, for opportunities that exist. I mean, it is always easier the following year to walk around with a badge on your chest showing that you banged out budget and hit your uh, goals to be a sellable, viable, usable um, uh, resource for somebody else. You know, career stepping, where you succeed in where you're at, and you're looking for opportunities to grow from that. And because of that, um, you have the ability to find other jobs. Sorry, my technology, I didn't keep my screen alive, and all of a sudden I lost track of looking at myself. So because of that, we have to look pragmatically as to how this year works out. What are some things that you can do to influence the value proposition of maintaining relevancy to what you're doing, job security for what you're doing, as well as the opportunities that can present itself for the potential of the lean year that 2026 seems to be developing into, as to being the one that is sought after, even though you don't have the extra bonus credentials of having been able to make budgets. Now, for those that do succeed in making their budget this year and or bonuses, that's going to be a huge highlight that you get to walk around as a badge of honor, to be able to say that even in the adversities of everything that happened, I was still able to succeed. The other is pragmatically trying to decide on fourth quarter strategies, which is the third part of my topic of today. We talked a little bit about budgets, we talked a little bit about bonuses, we're talking a little bit now about strategies. With where we are right now, in the United States domestic, I'll speak to most domestically, although I think it has a direct impact into international markets, because obviously for the Americans and the US citizens that are traveling abroad still, there's a sincere concern of whether that is still warranted given whatever their perspective of job security, financial security, other considerations, polarities of politics or whatever, as to whether they want to continue that idea of travel. So you may have a diminishment of interest in the US travel market. Obviously from the US, we've already experienced the negative impact of international travel to us. Some markets might still have some success to it, New York being one of them, Orlando being another, Las Vegas being another, that have, say, a good global draw persistently. But even we've seen those numbers go down dramatically as well. There is no positives in those numbers in any sense. So what about fourth quarter? How can we approach and influence fourth quarter? In reality, domestically, we have a lot of things that are constantly throwing curveballs at us. Other than the economic aspect of people's perception, economy being number one persistently in surveys with the American people as to their greatest concern. And you have layoffs already beginning to happen. You have governmental, we had all of what went on with that. And now the concept that people are going to be simply let go. So you have more and more of those people now seeking jobs. And as soon, if anybody hasn't gone through this process, which I'd be surprised if anybody said they never had this happen to them, when you lose your income, everything gets frozen all of a sudden. Everything has a particular value of prioritization. And so immediately, anything that doesn't need to be spent doesn't get spent. Everything that was thought to be something to be done, if it's not core to paying rent, paying for food, paying for your costs, immediately gets discarded. Categorically and unequivocally, travel is in that category. Travel gets suspended, canceled, or just nullified. That is not a part of the process of an unemployed person. You don't see them taking blowout vacations. I say that there's probably some exceptions somewhere. So that has an influence. You have people that, just like we're talking about our current situation with negative growth, sounds like, actually not boring. It's like with negative growth is not the word. Then you have job insecurity questions. There will be a culling of people to maintain operational solvency. People that, we just have to stretch farther, do more with less, so forth. So we've heard these over and over. You have social impacts as to what jobs now we didn't replace with technology options, but now given the downturn and potential growth value, now we're back on the table for consideration. So where you may have felt like you weren't going to displace from technological things like better guest experiences by having somebody not in your lobby doing it, or less front desk coverage and just create the line longer, then you're now looking at those as being viable options. So there's this job insecurity for us, even though if you're currently running your job, that you may consider that you want to make sure you don't spend thinking you might need the money later because circumstances get worse. And that happens at a time when we are looking to spend money. Our fourth quarter is a lot about the retail of presence and the travel of family. This is usually the second travel activity that most Americans have. When we say we have travel twice a year, one long, one short, this is the shorter holiday-based version of it. And then you throw into the works of it we're dealing with because of government shutdown. We're seeing the ripple effect of insufficient air traffic controllers, insufficient TSA, which has only begun to show itself. Reasons to travel when it comes to governmental museums and parks and things like this as a part of the travel destination, the things that draw people to your market, if those are things in your market, have ceased to be of value because it actually turns into cancellations. Because why go for that when that there is no longer available? I see friends that were traveling on the West Coast going to parks like Yosemite and seeing strings of cars that are outside the gate because the park's closed. So all those reservations and all those plans and everything else and the tangibility of them actually being there, gone, not something that can be done. So that negative impact is a huge ripple. Add to the fact, just even if the flights are just ripples of interruptions, the uncertainty factor that it creates makes an impact on the decision processes of travel. So now that I've painted the doom and gloom, what's the strategy ideas of this? Well, one is to rethink your markets, feeder markets, from a historical perspective to a centric perspective. One of that is to say, if you knew of the lift of people coming in historically from feeder markets and from fly zones, okay, people flying in from, these is your historical feeder markets, rethink to the possibility that you retarget people that are closer geographically to you, that may now consider you a thing to do where they didn't, they were going to fly elsewhere, but also as a value proposition to your cost factor value because they could drive to you. And if you make it affordable and make it reasonable, make it usable, then you now are looked at differently than just like, well, it's great to go there, but I really want to visit my family, or I want to visit that place for vacation or whatever, or for holiday. But the uncertainty principle of the flight travel might mean, you know what, let me look where I might be able to drive to. And all of a sudden the drive around market is a whole different perspective. And you might say, well, you know what, skip that tension and that stress and let's just drive here and have this as this year for us. Maybe next year we'll get back to the other one, if everything gets better or we get better or we're safer or whatever. But for right now, let's just change our plans. So rethink your historical feeder markets to being eccentric to your self market and radiate out from that as to who and how and what you would be able to offer and then negotiate with. The other is for people that really just don't want to take any risk value relationship to it at all. You have a high value option for a staycation. Go back, dig up that old term again. What can I do to keep localized people interested in coming and staying with me? Yes, they're in the market. Yes, they could stay home, but the whole idea of the vacation is to kind of change the venue. So you're the change of venue. Let them, if you're, a resort-based business, drive home the value proposition of getting out of the house again. For all those that went through the staycation marketing cycle, dig all those notes back up, update them to current interests, and realize that this is the opportunity to really begin to discuss the value you have to people that literally can drive home if they want to, if they forgot something, okay, to come back to the resort. You're offering them that escapism, okay? Obviously, I'm speaking in terms that this is negative for everybody. I would say it's more so true than not. There are some resorts and destinations and properties and scale of types of inventory that are fine. They haven't felt the real hard impact or even any impact. There's always exceptions to this process, and they may never. This is talking about the larger quantity of hotels and resorts that have already begun to feel and have persistently felt negative impacts this year, and have been riding we won't make those decisions yet. It has to really get much worse or get to this level before we have to start making those choices. And at that point, they made things turn into a reality. Well, we're in that fourth quarter stretch. And as I mentioned with bonuses, mathematically working it out, you know you're not going to hit the finish line. You know you're not going to hit the bonus. And in most ways, you're actually looking now, not about the bonus as much, if we're in that structure, but also just the measurable goal of solvency of the business, that it doesn't begin to dip too much into the negative where harder decisions have to be made. And for all of us that have lived through various cycles and business cycles like this, where there is a natural downturn into the industry itself, these are hard choices. There's layers of choices that get made. It's easy to cut some of the quote unquote fat, the things that are nice to have but don't need them, and that goes into memberships of associations, travel for conferences or training, optional training. Okay, those things are easy cuts. A reduction on some of the capital expense issues, maybe critical mass things that would affect rate availability or ADR. You know, if air conditioners are bad and they've been on the scale for capital improvement to be replaced, so that you can charge for them or put more inventory into back into servicing because the units are irreplaceable or irreparable. Those are choices. Those have to be made. We have to, in order to put that room in. But if you're not, but here's the good and the bad of these, and this is the reality of the hotel operations. Say I have 10 rooms down for whatever size hotel I have because of a mechanical issue with the rooms. But if my occupancy, I can't push it past a 55, 65% occupancy, those 10 rooms aren't hurting me to leave them unavailable, out of service. As a matter of fact, mathematically, if you indicate those on your star reports or your tracking reports and so forth, it can artificially show a better RevPAR because you've taken them out of your inventory cycle. Minus the big bells and whistles, the little nuances like that. The idea of it is that it diminishes the prioritization of spending the money on those things simply because they're not needed to maintain inventory. Nobody likes rooms out of order, but if you're not using them anyway, it's cost savings. That goes hand in hand with the idea that once you've cut the easy things out, the next layer of that is the things that are the least prioritized. The maintenance schedules begin to get affected, where things are being done at a frequency that is spaced a little farther because of the cost factor associated with the maintenance schedule. Scheduling, labor becomes stretched. Instead of the convenience coverage of having two people on the front desk on check-in prime and checkout prime, you might have one, and just let the line grow longer, as I mentioned before. When it comes to internal operations like laundry, because you're not needing full laundry service all the time, internally or externally, you cut down loads and cycle times, because dirty laundry can sit longer with less crew to have to worry about it, shorter hours, shorter need, because occupancy doesn't demand that all linen has to be ready, set, and available. When it comes to food and beverage, scheduling of team members on the floor. Okay, because of lack of demand to the food and beverage outlets. Sadly, most operations begin to look critically at marketing spend, which is literally cutting your nose off to spite your face. For what you can yield out of spending towards marketing, it drives more top line revenue, which helps abate some of the issues in the operations cost that you're trying to save. You can't cost save yourself into profitability. It's an argument I've always had for many years. That being said, marketing begins to have a very hypercritical perspective as to functionally valuable ROI campaigns versus experimentals, soft upper funnel discovery awareness ones that aren't directly showing value. You know they create value, but it's not a direct value, and so it's hard to sustain them from being under the microscope of let's take those down. Don't spend that money, or spend the money purely on the higher converting bottom of the funnel conversion campaigns, kind of thing. These discussions are already happening, have been happening, and they're going to continue to happening more. But that's the process of cut the fat, then cut the least priority of things, and then you start getting into the harder stuff. You start getting into cutting essential things, where you're self-inflicting problems by removing those assets, whether it's the scheduling of team members, whether it's the scheduling of operational functions, engineering things, where you're beginning to short your capabilities in a way that if something were to happen out of the norm, you wouldn't be able to respond effectively, and you create and exacerbate issues. That's hard. It's not as hard as all the way down to the bottom core, which I have still painful memories back from 9/11 of just being on a lifeline, that there's a light on somewhere and that there's somebody standing behind the front desk, and that person, you're on life support. You're literally just trying to keep the business in its location without it being actually closed and not working. That's the very bottom of the barrel when it comes to these functionality things before total locking the door and calling it a day. We're not in those situations yet. I'm just talking about the scale of how these things progress. But from a fourth quarter budget perspective of how to abate some of these concerns for this year so it doesn't create too much of a gloom and doom perspective next year, this is when you begin to look at your marketing, not just from an ROI, which we've always argued is a valuable tool, but it's a very myopic perspective. It's a very hard filter to use just on everything as being the first and most important criteria before you look at any other variable. Taking case in point, the funnel discussion, where if you're doing good discovery that impacts the availability of how people see you without the definitive direct conversion, but from that process, see that impact helped with the conversion at the time of your campaigns for making those conversion metrics, then it justifies its value. But when you're talking to an owner who's writing checks and they're not cashing as many, that's a metaphor that probably doesn't exist anymore since checks aren't used. But you know what I mean. The idea is I don't want to write as big of a check. If I can write a smaller check, I know I'm getting the smaller revenue anyway. To me, I got to stop the bleeding of the monies that I'm spending. Who else can we furlough? What else can we cut on cost for that? Is there a vendor we can change, like downscales this and so forth? There's a whole process of this contraction that we will be and have been and are going through. And as we diminish the demand to our market, the markets that have heavy saturation are going to be one of the first canaries in the coal mine when it comes to what they have to do about these things. You have tiered types of hotels that are already directly being affected by what these things are. You have hotels that are in the pipeline to be open or are opening. They're literally opening up to a low demand market, which is really scary because obviously there is a built-in ramp up cost that owners understand. Like, hey, we're opening the door. It doesn't mean we're going to be full. Love to think it is, but it doesn't happen. But there's a cap on the monies that can be spent to maintain the everything's now open perspective before they have to begin to retract from that and saying, we're not getting the business to cover the costs as much and we're running out of the startup money. So we have to start doing things that we didn't want to do, which is contract from our service profile. These are realities of what we're dealing with. This is natural market cycle for a lot of this stuff. We can point fingers at all the things that are going on as to how they're being exacerbated, but the reality of it is this is what happens in a downturn market. These are the things you go through. As the saying goes, when the water goes down, the rocks show up. You're running into these things now that you before could just glide over because you had enough revenue, top line revenue, to cover these kinds of things. These are the things you have to do. Fourth quarter, going to strategy. We've only mentioned one strategic thing, and that is to go from historical feeder to centric markets. The other is to begin to granularly isolate out specific demand periods that you can sell best. And the first thing about those is to make sure you're competitively rated to not outprice yourself, because as the contraction of demand goes down, so does the rate tolerance. Having some self-perceived value that you wish to maintain because you don't want to be wrong, or to tell an owner or management team that you're wanting to reduce the rate because that's the only way we're going to get people to book with us. And you don't want to be the one that brings in the bad news to, don't shoot the messenger. You will fail. You will not get your fair market share. A competitor who does this will get your market share, and you'll be left less than what you could have done simply because you wanted to keep face. Sorry, that's my candid perspective of that kind of strategy. Looking at your prime demand periods and taking the idea that, well, we're going to maintain our high rate because that's the only time we can get our high rate, you're exacerbating alternative and secondary values that you could get. There's other flow through monies that the value of that person being in your hotel, if you have ancillary revenue opportunities, can grow that value, that the money is, quote, cleaner in the sense there's less cost demand to it, okay, is much more than the cost demand related to the room per se. Obviously, if you don't have the amenities and so forth, getting into your property is much more important, but that value proposition has to be perceived well enough for them to maintain that. And with our volatility and our vulnerability of having last minute cancellation capabilities where they can simply drive by our competitors, see that there's a better opportunity, notice that there's no real difference in the value of what they're getting, they turn there, cancel ours, and we're sitting there going, wow, we just dropped off on our cancellations. I already know, and I'm speaking with clients in relationship to how even the airline disruptions, the idea of the airline disruptions are changing people's holiday booking scheduled plans for travel. The idea of Thanksgiving flight, the idea of Christmas flight, Hanukkah flight, New Year's flight are all under question. Not whether there's the stability of their income and job security, that's bad enough. It's whether or not they're going to be sitting on the tarmac because the plane all of a sudden can't leave for lack of infrastructure. That uncertainty principle, going through the dredges of the already arduous TSA security lines, exacerbated by the limitations of whether or not there's full staffing of it. Obviously, we hope these things change. Obviously, these things could change quite quickly or they could be elongated. We don't know. That's the element of this. The uncertainty principle is having its rule. It's the one that's driving the car right now, because people are sitting back and deciding on either the continuation of their current plans or whether to make plans. That's happening. So we have to be the least impactful perspective of what to consider in that process. Because as we know, there's 4 components to travel: transportation, accommodations, food and beverage, and entertainment. On holiday travel, entertainment is usually a reduced value cost because most of it is usually related to the holiday itself. So the destination tends to rule more of what to do than the cost of the ticket to attend it. I say that, and there's things like Orlando and so forth, theme parks and all that, there is a cost to it. But when it comes to going visiting family for Thanksgiving, it's not so much that you're paying for the entertainment cycle as it's more about getting there and what it's going to cost to stay there and how to travel and so forth. And that's the component that we're still a part of. It also might mean that we're excluded from that, where we had talked before where people want to go see the family. They don't want to stay at the house to do it. They prefer just to be at a hotel that eases the pressure on the family and so forth. Now those considerations are back in play. Now it's more of a, well, maybe the extra bedroom isn't so bad because I can save money by not getting a hotel room. Now that's back into conversation. The other conversation that comes back up is the unconstrained demand that Airbnb and Vrbo have for purposes like, well, rather than getting 3 hotel rooms, let's go find an Airbnb and we have 3 bedrooms. That turns into a viability. And now we have that strength of competition to us in market. And that's an unconstrained demand, as I mentioned. More and more of that inventory can flourish up as the demand grows. And you're sitting there with your hotel rate strategy. And even when you begin to lower your rates to try to compensate for what you're competing against, just the very inventory type is prohibitive compared to the options that are being put into your market. These are realities. And for fourth quarter, you look at it and see, this is just transient discussions. And those are just the highlights, the holiday parts. What about the soft pre-Thanksgiving where people are only thinking about Thanksgiving? So they're literally reducing their expenses load so that they can afford the holiday travel. What about the people that after Thanksgiving are now gearing up for Christmas and their sites are only for Christmas, but that lull beforehand of the, we'll go do our Christmas thing, but let's not spend money until then kind of thing. We got retail considerations, presents and so forth. You have other considerations where people are literally faced with the option of, do I buy a present or do I travel and say I don't have one? Because they don't have enough for both. And those are when the changes of considerations happen as to what their travel plans are. These are the realities of fourth quarter. You have to address what it is that people are looking for and justify, hopefully helping them justify why you're a part of that equation for them. These are the things that fourth quarter generates for you to do for marketing. Those soft spots. How can I get people in my resort or hotel or what have you, in a restaurant, just for collaboratively spending money in restaurants is still money spent. And these pre-lull periods, pre-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas, kind of thing. There is a short window carryover between Christmas and New Year's that tends to catalyst itself all the way through. There might be a dip in relationship between Christmas and Happy, but usually people consolidate those two holidays. And if they can negotiate their days off to be filling that gap point, all the better. So they kind of have a little bit more of a continuity between those two holiday periods than the pre-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas ramp-ups tend to do. So isolating what markets you can hit, the localized market, like I said, the centric market, the value of the staycation market, the value of cost in relationship to one tank travel mentality, get in the car kind of thing, a van, whatever. These are what you need to rethink rather than just saying that I had this plan 6 months ago or last year when I made the budget, that this is our historical marketing campaigns. We dust them off, bring them up to speed, launch them on time, and let them run the way we had done last year, expecting that we were going to be driving for the same markets last year, for the same interest last year, only to find out that that feeder market is not as valuable this year as it was last year because of the things that are happening this year. So strategically, it's making sure that you're out and aware to people so they understand what your value proposition is early. And that sounds like from a marketing strategy, that would be less about ZMOT marketing, zero moment of transaction, bottom of the funnel conversion value that you usually occupy your marketing spends in that show good direct channel ROI. Instead, feature up into the educational phases and possibly even the discovery phases of influencing the interest in you as a catalyst for them to convert with you. And that's the understanding level. Here's a great, interesting twist to this year that we didn't have as much. We had a little bit, but it's really become a factor this year. And that is the generative AI search discovery functions. People are learning and understanding to use AI more effectively in their travel plans. And a lot of what drives people to stay with you is not as traditional as it used to be in how we perceive our market message. It used to be rates and dates, because we looked at that people were first discovering that we're in the area of their interest and they would see what that means financially and whether we had the availability for them for that financial ability. Now we have that, which is affordability and location, but we all have a whole nother spectrum of getting inside of their dialogue as to what to be considered for because of proximity, awareness, value proposition of other things that drive people to our market. And that can come from driving how AI perceives us in the dialogue that now users are having with AI on discovering what they want and need to find to do for travel. Obviously, if it's driving to a familiar space, they're fully aware of what you are, hopefully. If you're a newer product or you've improved your product, you want to make sure people are aware that you've done that and that you are there. If you're an old product and people are aware of it, you want to make sure that they know that you keep yourself up and fixed and nice so that the old hotel that's always been there, that's the closest to the family, is still a great hotel and the best for their choices, if that's you. That all can come through more of a generative content development that AI uses. We've had conversations about that. We've had conversations of how to do that. I have a very fascinating and ongoing conversation with our hospitality marketing group right now as to facilitating how you may work that process. Everybody has an opinion, obviously, and you certainly hear tons of people slap the AI monicum buzzword on everything that they do. My toothbrush is AI powered, so to speak. But the reality of it is nobody tells you effectively how to do it or how to measure it still. They'll just tell you that it's happening and you should be doing it. Doing what? Well, the thing that you're supposed to be doing. If they're doing it well, they don't share it. If they don't know what they're doing, they don't share it. Nobody's sharing, this is what you do. Well, we're actually going to be doing that. We have done that. And our hospitality marketing club, it's been a really fun conversation as people become aware of, oh, I can do that. This is how you do it. We get a very good collaborative conversation. I highly recommend if you're doing hospitality marketing, join our club, hospitalitymarketing.club, put your email in, send you a quiz. If you're validated as being as a hospitality marketer doing this work, then we'll invite you into the peer group. And it's not on Facebook or anything like that. Don't be looking for that. Although we do have our Hospitality Marketing Club Facebook on there. But it's not, it is connected, but it's not used for this. There we go. We have our own community group that we run this off of. Fun conversations with it. But these are things that you have to face fourth quarter. Is it going to get you back your budget bonuses? If you're that far off? Probably not. It would be quite a radical shift in demand and interest. I'm not saying that it can't happen, and your market is unique as anybody else that I generalize about. But the reality is, if you already see the writing on the wall, and you know that even if you were to exceed your goals, let alone hopefully just even attain them, you would never be able to catch up on the windfall of what you haven't been able to do, then maintain the course, do your best. Obviously, that's the character that you are. That you have, but also know that you can be as adaptive as possible, because you have nothing really to lose by making a better efforts, for you have everything to gain if you're successful. And for fourth quarter, you really need to break it down. Don't look at it as any other typical fourth quarter with holiday highlights and gap points. Look at it from a much more granular perspective of how do you adaptively communicate for the parts that you can draw business for, and where can you try to discover business for the places that you don't have it. And that's the key element into fourth quarter. So with that, for everyone that's been watching live, thank you so much for doing so, and all the variety of time squares, places that you watch us. Again, South Korea, really neat. Also, for those that play this back, we do a recast of the show, 11:30 a.m. Wednesday mornings, Sydney, Australian time for our APAC friends, and 11:30 a.m. London time for our EU and Middle East friends that are a little more favorable time zones. Obviously, there's a re-show of this on our forever on our TV channel, Hospitality Channel TV, on your smart TV, Roku, Google, Amazon, whatever it's channel. Show's always on the free side of that. And also on our simulcast, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube channels, variety of associations. Thank you so much, associations, for running our show on your Facebook pages, and on also your YouTube channels. Thank you for doing that. And we're also on Twitch. Sorry, mind blanked. For all those that use their gaming platform for media, and we're an app where you can go on your Apple iOS or Google Play, look for Hospitality Channel. We're an app. We play there. There is a paid gateway if you want to watch other content associated with hospitality industry, but the show's always on the free side. You're happy to do that at all times. And of course, we broadcast the audio of the show on our Hospitality Radio. The TV channel is in 209 countries. The radio station is in 39 countries. And then, of course, we also have our podcast, which is the audio and podcast channels you can watch or listen to podcasts on your Apple, iTunes, and Spotify, and all the rest of them. iHeartRadio, we're on all of those, and tons more for podcasts as well. So now that I've told you all the places you can find us, if you have any questions for me, any feedback for me, any insights, there's two ways to reach me. Obviously by email, which Lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. Answer each and every email related to the TV channel, the show, the radio station, the podcast, all of that stuff. The other is audio. If you want to just have an audio comment or answer the question of the week that we always throw out in there, go to hdm.news/talkback. And you get my question of the week if you want to answer it. And if not, you want to just tell me something, your opinion, spout off, ask a question, whatever. I answer all those as well. And you can tell me if you have permission to refer to your comments and or suggestions on the audio thing. You can indicate that yes, no, or whatever. So anyways, because consent is a thing and your data is your data. All that said, as always, my name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and look forward to talking to you all next week.